You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So in the last episode, I was talking about the 6 hours per week for a better relationship by John Gottman. And I thought I'd carry on a little bit today with one particular element of that program to enhance your relationship, and which I didn't raise in the last podcast, and that was about the issue of date night. Now, it's come to my attention that it appears that a lot of people are starting to look at the concept of date night as a silver bullet approach to solving problems in the relationship, especially sexual ones. And I am concerned that I'm also seeing this being promoted with couples often who are having difficulties in their sexual relationship. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is that a lot of couples do have issues with sex in their relationship. But as a therapist, I need to ask myself the question, is that a symptom or a cause of the other difficulties that most couples in this instance are experiencing? Now, in my experience as a therapist over 40 years, generally speaking, it's rare that sex is the primary problem. I come back to the idea that usually couples get themselves into difficult situations in their relationship because there are a number of elements that are not coming together well. And if I come back to the idea that sex is a form of communication, the first thing that I need to look at with couples then is what's their communication style like in the relationship? What is that they're saying, not saying? What is it that they're hearing or not hearing? Are they in fact listening to their partner? And the answer most of the time is that for a lot of couples, they think they're communicating really, really well, but in reality, they're not. There's often a whole bunch of stuff that's missing in the communication. For a start, a lot of couples don't give themselves a lot of time to talk things through. We are, by definition in our culture, generally time poor. So we are looking for quick fixes all the time. And this is where I'm afraid that the whole notion of date night has become one of those quick fixes. Stuff that you do on the hop. You schedule it in like a gym session and you rush in, you work out, you come out, and it's all good. Now, date night for a lot of people means different things. But generally speaking, for a lot of couples, date night's about the sort of romantic side of the relationship. And the focus frequently is on sex, the physical level of intimacy, and how to enhance that. Now, here's the thing. Is that actually going to work? And as I said before, usually if we're going to have sexual issues in a relationship, like libido, like satisfying sex, there's usually other issues, and I talked about the just then about the issue about communication. But what other elements do we need to really pay attention to? Well, remember in one of the podcasts I talked about this idea of reductionism. And that is an approach that's used in many disciplines, including psychology, that centers around the belief that we can best explain something by breaking it down into its individual parts. So, a lot of couples go into therapy having identified the particular part that's a problem. Now, interestingly enough, I very rarely in my experience had a couple come to me, sit down on the couch and go, "We're having a problem with our friendship." Generally speaking, they come into therapy either because they're fighting a lot or they're not fighting enough. Now, they usually don't identify that, but it's often an underpinning. It's a low energy type of relationship where not a lot goes on other than probably taking care of the kids, the house, the jobs, and their friends. Right? So, that's a part of it. I also don't hear a lot of couples raise the issue about affection. Right? So, here's the point that I'm trying to make. Imagine focusing on date night simply as a sexual romp. Think about this in terms of your relationship as well, right? Is your marriage or your relationship based solely on the idea of having great fireworks in the bedroom? Whiz bang sex. Now, the answer most of you come up with is no. Most of you will talk about all the other elements of a loving, intimate relationship. But interestingly enough, in our culture, we seem to, have gone the reductionist path. And when we have problems with sex, we go to a sex therapist. Now, I'm not saying that they're not useful. They have an absolutely majorly important part in the therapeutic spectrum. But usually it's interesting because a lot of sex therapists actually work a lot more about the other stuff than they do necessarily about sex. Now, if we focus on date night purely from a sexual point of view, then what we're doing is we're putting date night into the category of a perpetual one-night stand that happens either once a week or once a fortnight, depending on the frequency that the couple agrees on. And interestingly, my experience with one-night stands when I was young and free of a partner was that essentially after a while it becomes hollow and somewhat soul-destroying because the yearning for something more doesn't actually get stilled. The yearning for something more grows. Now, I'm not saying that having one-night stands was terrible, an awful thing to do. Not at all. Had a lot of fun with a lot of very nice women. But again, it didn't satisfy my other needs for intimacy, of which I wanted sex to be part of. And the problem with one-night stands too is that after a while, it eventually leads to a desensitized experience, especially of the other person. And it might be just sort of transactional. Now, again, and I'm not putting this in the realm for those of you who have friends with benefits of saying, stop doing that. That's not what I'm saying. Often when we have a friend with benefits, there's a lot of care for that person. There's a lot of thoughtfulness about that person. But for some reason, it doesn't flourish or blossom into that real partnership that most of us are looking for. So it is very, very important at this point to look at what is it that makes the relationship and date night sing. And that's where I come back to what I was saying in the last podcast, is that it requires the elements of focusing on our friendship, focusing on affection, focusing on acknowledgement and praising the other person, giving them positive feedback, not just, oh, you look great, but also showing signs and expressing signs of appreciation for other aspect that person that I'm choosing to live my life with brings to our relationship. Bring it on every level. And it's a bit like that question of, if I look at the relationship as a whole, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to us? Because, again, when we look at all of our relationships, firstly, we need to come from the place of I, and then we need to think about the we. Now, a lot of times people get lost with all of that. And my suggestion is this is where we need to begin to be very clear that there are no silver bullets. Like a date night is not going to fix my relationship. In fact, date night's only going to work well if the other elements of being in a close friendship, an emotional and intellectual friendship with my partner that I need to nurture. It also means that we need to share some practical things. It doesn't need to be everything. Like, my wife doesn't surf, but she loves the beach. She likes being down there. And occasionally I do revert to the old or young adolescent who rushes out of the water and goes, honey, did you see that last wave? But not get snotty when she says, oh, no, I was reading my book, right? Oh, well, that's okay. No worries. At this stage of the game, my narcissism doesn't require that acknowledgement and validation. And so one of the things that this brings me to is a quote from Erich Fromm in The Art of Loving, where he says, paradoxically, the ability to be alone is the condition for the ability to love. Now think about this. This has a lot of meaning, a lot of depth in it. It's very, very important to really sit with this and unpack it. What's Eric saying with this? And my first port of call is what I've been talking about, on and off throughout a lot of the podcasts. And that is, as men, we need to learn to be alone. But most of us spend our time either feeling lonely or alienated or have condemned ourselves to isolation. From that platform, we are not going to have healthy, satisfying, long-term relationships. We need to get our shit together here. And the first part of it is that we need to learn to be alone, to be content in my own company, in my own relationship with myself, so that I don't become dependent on having all my needs satisfied by my partner. That is unrealistic. It's actually leads to a really toxic relationship. Guys, she's not your mother. Hopefully she's your friend and lover. So you need to be able to exercise your capacity to care for yourself on every level, physically, emotionally, socially, intellectually, right? It's just part of the package, part of the tapestry of what it is to be a human being. And in our case, we're talking about what it means to be a male. Don't, in a sense, get caught up with this idea of protecting her and, providing for her and all that. Most women are perfectly capable of doing that for themselves. They don't need you necessarily to do that. Well, society might make them more dependent on us. Patriarchy wants that. It's that very red herring about what is supposed to give men sense of substance and place, you need to first of all make sure you can take care of yourself. And then you can take care of whoever else needs your care, your nurture, and so on. But it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. We need to be there for our kids, but let me just focus at this point on our loving relationship with our partner. Remember the idea that somehow alpha males, the warrior, the protector, the provider, they're social roles, and they've condemned men to feel often quite insignificant and insecure. Because what's the measure of this role? Is it something that is going to actually pull me down? You know, we talk about this stuff about, being a real man. I don't need to exhibit that. The moment someone says to me, I'm an alpha male, I immediately know that we're in the wrong playground. This guy's just not really actually aware of what that means about him. It's a bit like, if you have to tell people you're intelligent, you're actually probably not. Now, half the time that has nothing to do with your intelligence, but more to do with your insecurity. Sort out your relationship with yourself. Then step into a healthy relationship. Then focus on the ingredients that make this relationship sing, that harmonizes, that is aligned, that you're aligned with each other. Right? And then date night, when it gets into that romantic, sexual side, is really going to make a difference. It's going to be the cherry on top that pops. That's what I'm talking about. So these elements cannot be reduced into other little elements. We need to look at the whole. We need to really focus on how these elements create the whole, which is greater than the sum of its parts. And if I need to polish up one of those elements, I need to spend time and effort on doing that. And I need to engage with my partner to bring that to the table as well. I need her to step in, not step out. Most couples need to look at their actual attachment styles. Are you anxious, ambivalent, avoidant? Have you got a partner that's anxious, ambivalent, or avoidant? All three at different times. These things are very, very important. And so in my final summary, if it's just putting in date night as a sexual romp, that's not going to sort your relationship. It's not going to enhance. It, in fact, could add more pressure and more fractures into the relationship than what's necessary. So remember, love is the whole, not the parts. So on that note, I'm going to finish, and I'll wish you a happy week. Allow yourself to make a difference. Inspire change.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.